The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is one of Agatha Christie's most famous detective novels, first published in 1926. It features the Belgian detective Hercule Poirot, who has retired to a quiet English village. The story is renowned for its shocking twist ending, which challenged the conventions of detective fiction at the time. Plot summary. The story is narrated by Dr. James Shepherd, a physician in the small village of King's Abbot, who becomes Poirot's confidant and assistant in solving the murder case. The novel begins with the death of Mrs. Ferrars, a wealthy widow rumored to have poisoned her husband a year earlier. It is soon revealed that she had been being blackmailed for this crime and, unable to bear the guilt and pressure, she committed suicide. Before her death, Mrs. Ferrars had confided in Roger Ackroyd, a wealthy man in the village and her potential fiancé, revealing her secret about the blackmail. The next evening, Roger Ackroyd is found murdered in his study. He was stabbed to death, and the only clue is that he received a letter from Mrs. Ferrars just before his death, disclosing the identity of her blackmailer. However, when the police arrive, the letter is missing, leaving them with few leads. Characters involved: Dr. James Shepherd, the narrator and the local physician, who seems to be Poirot's sidekick in the investigation. Caroline Shepherd, Dr. Shepherd's nosy sister, who is always eager to gossip and pry into the affairs of others in the village. Hercule Poirot, the world-famous Belgian detective who has retired to King's Abbot but is reluctantly drawn into the case. Roger Ackroyd, the murder victim, a wealthy industrialist who was in a relationship with Mrs. Ferrars. Mrs. Ferrars, a wealthy widow who committed suicide after confessing her guilt to Ackroyd. Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's stepson and primary suspect, who has gone missing after the murder. Flora Ackroyd, Roger Ackroyd's niece, who is engaged to Ralph Peyton. Major Blunt, a big game hunter who is also in love with Flora. Parker, Ackroyd's butler, who is suspected of blackmail. Ursula Bourne, Ackroyd's housemaid, who turns out to be secretly married to Ralph Peyton. Investigation. Hercule Poirot is reluctantly brought out of retirement to solve the case, working with Dr. Shepherd. As they investigate, Poirot uncovers a web of lies, secrets, and alibis among the people living at Ackroyd's home. Poirot carefully interviews each of the suspects, piecing together clues and uncovering the truth. He learns that Ralph Peyton, Ackroyd's stepson, had a secret marriage to Ursula Bourne, and this fact had been concealed from everyone because Ralph was in financial trouble. Ralph was seen as the prime suspect because he had been in the vicinity of the house on the night of the murder, but he remains missing throughout much of the story. Poirot's investigation reveals that everyone seems to be hiding something. Mrs. Ferrars had been blackmailed, and Ackroyd's butler, Parker, had been spying on his employer, hoping to find information he could exploit. Flora lied about her whereabouts on the night of the murder to cover up her attempted theft of money from her uncle's desk. The shocking twist. The story reaches its climax when Poirot gathers all the suspects in a room, a classic Christie setup. He lays out the facts he has uncovered and finally reveals the truth. In a stunning twist, Poirot accuses the narrator, Dr. Shepherd, of being both Mrs. Ferrars' blackmailer and Roger Ackroyd's murderer. Shepherd, who had seemed like Poirot's reliable confidant throughout the novel, had blackmailed Mrs. Ferrars after learning of her guilt in her husband's death. When Mrs. Ferrars confessed everything to Ackroyd in her letter, Shepherd intercepted the letter and killed Ackroyd to prevent him from discovering the truth.